Welcome to the Gray Path Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tony B. Today, we are finally wrapping up our 10-part series that took place of the previous 10 episodes, this one included, that really was focusing on highlighting another side to popular villains and or heroes, essentially playing devil's advocate and taking a look at these bastions of evil, bastions of good, and discovering whether or not we are maybe judging them unfairly or if there's more to what's going on than originally seen. And the whole point of this series was very clearly to show you that the world is rarely ever black and white. I've had a lot of fun during this series. I'm going to have a lot of fun in this episode. I'm also glad the 10-parter's over. I'm looking forward to getting into some of the more normal style episodes I normally like to do, character highlights, focusing on shows and digging through and finding lessons and that kind of stuff. But before we can do that, we got to finish this up. And we're going to finish it up today with quite possibly one of, if not the most hated figure I've ever run across in fiction. And of course, today we are here to talk about Dolores Jane Umbridge. Now, that is of a Harry Potter fame. Now, full disclosure, I am not a Harry Potter person. I don't know what they're called, Potterheads, I think. It's not one of the fandoms that I really prescribe to. I've seen a few of the movies. I've never read any of the books. Now, in preparing for this episode, I have gone back and watched some movies which this character was in. I've been doing some online research, reading various chat rooms and wiki pages and stuff like that, talking to some of my friends who are Potterheads in order to really try to do as much justice to this episode as I can. Now, in the spirit of this series, today, we're not talking about Dolores Umbridge because we hate her, although that does seem to be the consensus amongst everyone I've talked to. We're going to talk about her today because I think she's getting a bum rap. Now, I will preface all of this by saying today's episode is really kind of focusing on the Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which I believe was the 5th movie. It's where she's introduced and the one in which she has the largest role. She does show up in some of the other movies. We're not really going to touch much on what goes on there. We're going to focus pretty heavily here on her role within Order of the Phoenix. And the reason for that is it's her time at Hogwarts. Before we dive directly into everything I want to talk about, I will say, as this is not one of my preferred fandoms, all I'm really going to be able to speak on is the research that I've done. This won't be like Star Wars or Dragonlance or any of the other fandoms where I've got like this deep encyclopedic knowledge. This one, I've only got my notes from my research. So I'll try to at least introduce things I'm talking about briefly, but I won't be able to provide real in-depth background. So if you're listening to this episode, if you're not familiar with Harry Potter, I'll try my best to at least give you about as much knowledge as I have. But if you're a big Potterhead fan, don't be looking for deep like background information because this is not one of my preferred fandoms. So without further ado, we're gonna dive right in. So who is Dolores Jane Umbridge? Well, Dolores Jane Umbridge is what they call a half-blood in the Harry Potter universe. And a half-blood is a magic user. So it could be a wizard or a witch, or I don't know what other terms I use, but I like to use blanket term magic user. It's a magic user with muggle-born parents or grandparents. Now, for those who don't know, a muggle is someone who is non-magical. It's someone who's born without magic. So a half-blood would be a lot like a half-elf in the sense that one parent was an elf and one was a human. A half-blood is one parent had magical power and one did not. And that's how they become half-bloods. So she was a half-blood. She had multiple titles throughout her existence within the Harry Potter universe. She was a professor, a high inquisitor, a headmistress, and a senior undersecretary. She worked for the Ministry of Magic. She was a bureaucrat. But without diving too far in right now, I want to take this in a very logical manner here. So let's start with her introduction to the universe and her time at Hogwarts, because that's really what we're going to be focusing on here today. So she's introduced in the 5th movie or 5th book, depending upon which avenue you go, and that is Order of the Phoenix. And she's introduced as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. So in the Harry Potter universe, Defense Against the Dark Arts, that particular post or position, that professor, their job is to teach the students how to defend against more offensive versions of magic, how to defend themselves and how to cast spells that are a little more offensive in nature and a little more dangerous than, some of the more lighter spells like charms and things like that. She was brought in to be the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher by the Ministry of Magic. So in the Harry Potter universe, the Ministry of Magic is basically, I guess you could say, like the wizard government almost. At least that's how they're portrayed, how I saw them. They're really portrayed more of like a governmental body over magic users in general. Now, her time in Hogwarts, she does eventually become a High Inquisitor and eventually the head mistress. Now, there's things to talk about, though, to kind of understand what happened, why she's getting so much hate, and I think a more pragmatic approach to how she actually is as a character. So when she's introduced, they're all in this very large dining hall, and Dumbledore, who is the head of Hogwarts school, and he's a powerful wizard, he's kind of sitting at this lectern and he's jabbering away at basically staff changes and staff updates. And he introduces Dolores Umbridge. Now, you see her briefly in the movie before this scene, but this is when she's really kind of showcased. You see her earlier because the primary protagonist of the movie, Harry Potter, he has to go in front of this hearing where they basically try to expel him from Hogwarts for underage magic use, which kind of sounds a lot like underage drinking. In a nutshell, he was out in the real world. There was a muggle or a non-magic user near him, and he cast a spell, and that is against the rules for magic users, especially for children magic users. So Harry Potter's at this hearing where he has to basically defend himself so he doesn't get expelled from Hogwarts. She's there. She does have a little bit of a role. She kind of pops up there, but her real introduction is in the dining hall when they introduce that she is the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. And Dumbledore does his regular spiel. This is who she is. She'll be a great addition, blah, blah, blah. Goes to move on with his agenda, and she cuts him off. Now, some people take offense to this because they're like, because Dumbledore he's a hero in the story, and the reader or the viewer, if you're watching the movies, we're meant to like Dumbledore and side with Dumbledore. He's meant to be a hero to us. So anyone who interrupts him or is disrespectful to him, we see as someone who's bad. But after she's introduced by Dumbledore, he goes to move on. She interrupts him and makes a speech. Now, it's a really, in my opinion, it's a good speech from a new professor. And I use air quotes here, she was nice. Yeah, it's a fake niceness, but I mean, anyone who's ever worked customer service, who has ever been a teacher or a professor or a mentor, fake niceness kind of comes with it. Better fake niceness than, being a douche nozzle. So she's an older woman. I would peg her probably in her early 50s when you see her in Order of the Phoenix, and she wears all pink, like atrociously all pink. She's dressed a lot like her Sunday finest, and how an old lady would dress going to church. And she gets up and she makes a speech, and it's a relatively efficient speech. I mean, she basically just says, hey, look, I'm here to kind of help you guys achieve what you need to achieve. And she seems very nice. She's not, she doesn't hide the fact that she's from the Ministry of Magic, but she seems somewhat excited or at least focused, if not excited, for her new role. Now, there's a couple of things you really need to understand here, because people kind of see her as an interloper or a meddler for some of the things that happens when she's at Hogwarts. But she was brought in by the Ministry of Magic specifically due to Dumbledore's failures. I mean, he had the last, I think, like 3 or 4 Defense Against the Dark Arts professors that he had hired had resulted in attacks on students as well as the death of a student. He was not able to find someone on his own to fill the post, and it needed to be staffed, which is why the Ministry of Magic stepped in. And yes, they put someone loyal to them into the position. I don't think that's inherently evil. I think just like Dumbledore has a tendency to put people who are loyal to him into positions, I really don't see anything wrong with the Ministry of Magic doing that. They want to put someone who's efficient. They want to put someone who follows the rules. They want to put someone in there who they feel will actually do the job and not just be one of Dumbledore's yes men, which we'll get to in a moment. The final reason she's brought in is the Ministry of Magic has grown tired of Dumbledore's, I don't even know what you want to call it, his laissez-faire attitude towards the children's education. For Dumbledore, he's been focused on this war against Voldemort, which is the big baddie in the Harry Potter universe. At this point in time, for Order of the Phoenix, you as a reader or as a viewer, you know that Voldemort is actually back. He was thought dead. He appears to be coming back. Dumbledore knows this. Harry Potter knows this. A few other people know this. But for the most part, it seems just to be jumping at shadows. It almost like an excuse. So to the Ministry of Magic, which is also, again, think of it as like the Department of Education or the government, they look at it and they're like, they just had enough. I mean, Dumbledore, his school tends to be chaotic. Anarchy has a much bigger place than rules when it comes to Dumbledore's Hogwarts. They're tired of that. They're tired of the kids getting a subpar education. They're tired of these professors who aren't qualified. And they're tired of his focus on this war rather than on educating the children on how to properly become wizards, witches, magic users. So when she arrives here at Hogwarts and takes a full accounting of what she's working with, she runs across this cadre of yes men and women, of yes people, if you want to call it that, who Dumbledore had filled all of these teaching positions with. People who weren't qualified to be there, but were there because they were Dumbledore's friends, or Dumbledore thought they might be useful in this war that he's trying to fight, as opposed to being what they're supposed to be. I mean, at the end of the day, Hogwarts is a fucking school. Hogwarts is not where you go and you hang out. The entire purpose of Hogwarts is it's essentially like elementary through high school for magic users. It's their fucking school. It's not there to make the kids happy. It's there to teach them important things, because at the end of the day, these children have the ability to wield fucking magic. That's a big thing. Like, you have to take into the understanding, in the Harry Potter universe, magic is real. Maybe it's not real to muggles, but it's very real. It exists. So teaching people who have access to this enormous amount of power is paramount. And that's what Hogwarts is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the school where these kids go, and it's a boarding school. They live there, where they go to learn how to hone their craft safely. So it's important, emphasis on safely. So after she has her introduction, we then get to see her in her first class. And again, she's overtly nice, which I've actually had teachers that were that way. Like, you could tell the niceness was fake. But again, it was them making an effort to provide a structured, comfortable learning environment for the children. So she gets into class, and Harry Potter and his friends are in this class, and she explains, and she starts handing the books out. She goes on to explain that her class is going to be theoretical. It's not going to be a practical class. Now, anyone who's ever been in college, anyone who's ever been to school, every teacher or professor, they have their own way of doing things. I had teachers who focused on theoretical. I had teachers who focused on practical. You know, if you're going to be a nurse, I say this because my ex-girlfriend was a nurse. So, you know, I happened to have known her when she was going through LPN school. So I got kind of an inside view of how her learning went. Well, theoreticals were taught before practicals. So you're like your practical labs. You'd go and you'd learn your theoretical concepts, because then you can apply your theoretical concepts in the practical. It's just a good way of doing it. It's the same thing when you go to colleges and stuff. Like in physics, you'll learn the theoretical concepts of physics, and then you'll have an actual lab where you can practice what you learned. So she's decided that her class, her Defense Against the Dark Arts class, is going to be theoretical. Okay, yeah, granted, there's no fun spells to play around with, and that's kind of a bummer, but not completely outside, or not even remotely outside of the realm of what a normal professor may do for their class. So she decides it's theoretical. That should have been that. Like, again, The students are there to fucking learn. The students aren't there to have an equal say in their education. They're there to learn what is put in front of them because the curriculum was designed by more experienced people who are trying to mold these kids into safe, respectable magic users. Well, that's not what happens at all. Instead, Harry Potter, well, at first I believe it was Hermione, which is his female friend, she comments on, hey, there's not going to be any spells. So then, Umbridge goes, well, no, we're going to teach theoretical. The Ministry of Magic has determined that theoretical would fulfill your requirement for defense against the dark arts. So again, that's the way of saying like the education department has decided that, okay, let's just say for high school, let's say there was a class that was gun safety, because in a lot of ways, that's what defense against the dark arts is. It's basically gun safety. So let's say there was a high school class with gun safety in it. Now, previously, maybe that gun safety class was taught by a teacher who brought in actual fucking guns and had them mess around with the guns while teaching them how to do so safely. I don't necessarily think that was the best way to go. Instead, now you have this new teacher, you have Umbridge, who comes in and says, okay, I'm going to teach you about gun safety, but we're going to learn about it theoretically. You can learn about gun safety without actually having a gun in your hand and shooting each other. I think her approach is just more safe. Plus, big emphasis here, her approach is following the guidelines set forth by the Ministry of Magic. She didn't set forth those guidelines. She's part of the Ministry of Magic, but she didn't set those guidelines. She's following what the Ministry of Magic stated is the requirements. No different than a teacher in school these days following whatever sort of state or federal mandates the Department of Education puts forward. That doesn't make her a bitch. That doesn't make her an evil person. That makes her a good employee and a good teacher. She's following what she's supposed to follow. She's not a maverick. She's not a renegade. She's doing what she's supposed to do. Makes her a good employee. So Harry Potter immediately starts arguing with her, like not like a friendly disagreement, like he's hostile. Like he has a hostile tone of voice. He's hostile towards her. He starts arguing with her, telling her that she's wrong. She has no right to not teach them spells. They need to learn how to defend themselves. What are they going to do if they're actually attacked in the real world with theoretical knowledge? To which Umbridge comes back and says, well, who do you really think is going to be coming out there and attacking you? Like what kind of that old adage of, how many enemies do you have? So, of course, Harry Potter comes back and says, well, Voldemort is real and he's back and he's coming after me. Now, to the reader or the viewer, yes, what Harry Potter is saying here is true because the viewer / the reader, they know that Voldemort is in fact back. But the Ministry of Magic has no definitive proof to prove that. Right now, it's just a theory, and to them, it seems more of just like a panic than an actual crisis. They don't think it's real because there's been no evidence put forth to show that Voldemort is in fact back. So Harry Potter to Umbridge, he's arguing with her the first day of class in front of all of the students, and his crux for this argument is this belief that this long dead dark wizard is back and after him. So at first, Umbridge really does try to maintain the peace when Harry Potter's sitting there arguing with her. She really does. But he continues to yell at her until finally she loses her fucking cool and she yells quickly and then comes right back down to her controlled fake niceness and then tells Harry Potter he needs to see her after class. So this is very, very, very important to pay attention with because right now, okay, so as a reader or a viewer, you might be like, well, fuck this bitch. She's trying to prevent them from defending themselves and go Harry Potter and blah, 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 blah. But that mindset, that's all predicated on knowledge that Dolores Umbridge does not have. She doesn't have knowledge that Voldemort's back. In fact, as far as she knows, he's not back. And Harry is a disruptive, potentially dangerous student who's undermining her authority on her first day in front of her class. Now, anyone who's ever taught before, whether you're a teacher or a college professor or whatever, if you've ever taught in front of a large body of students, one of the most important things you can do is not have your credibility and your authority undercut. It's not easy controlling 20, 30 students. It's not. It's more so difficult when you have someone who on the first fucking day undermines your authority. So she tells Harry after class, you need to get your ass to my office because we need to address this. Like, she's very clear about that. So next scene cuts forward to Harry going into the Harry going into her office for punishment. Now, her office is decorated exactly the same way she is. It's pink. It very much reminds me of like an old lady who goes to church all the time. It's covered in plates that have cats on them. She just kind of reminds me of an old lady. So he goes in, and she's pleasant, and she says, look, you're going to be punished because you can't do that. You cannot sit there and argue with me in front of the class. So she has him get a piece of parchment, which is another word for paper, and a quill, which is basically just a pen. It's like a feather that you write with. And at one point, Harry goes, all right, well, what the hell am I supposed to write? Because this is not Harry's first time in detention. And he figures, I'm just going to have to keep writing until I get the point across, whatever. I've made my son in real life. I've made my son do that. He does something he's not supposed to do. I make him write, I will not lie 50 times, or, I will not, whatever, 20, 30 times, whatever it takes. It's like a repetition thing as a punishment. So Harry's got this quill and he's like, okay, well, where's the ink and what do you want me to write? And she goes, oh, there's no need for ink. And I want you to write, I will not tell lies. And he goes, well, how many times do you want to write it? And her response was, as many times as it takes to get the point across. So Harry's like, whatever, takes the quill, starts writing, and it writes in red. So he writes, I will not tell lies. And then he starts to feel this pain on his dominant hand, which is his right hand. He looks down, and basically cut into his flesh is his handwriting that says, I will not lie. And it's a pretty chilling scene. I'm not going to lie. It's a pretty chilling scene. When I watched it, I was like, oh shit. And she looks at him and she goes, well, do you think you're going to need to write it anymore? Or something along those lines. Point being, Harry got the point after writing it one fucking time. Now, yes, that could be construed as torture. I don't think it is. I mean, talking to a lot of my friends, and I'm sure, and this is a shout out to you, Bethany, and a shout out to you, Katie, two of my friends who are part of the Enactioneers, and they despise Dolores Umbridge. And I know that a lot of that despising stems from this enchanted quill. Well, I hate to say it, but I actually think the enchanted quill is a useful tool, and I don't necessarily think she was wrong to use it. And here is my case on why. So a couple of things that you should take note of, or at least pay attention to. The quill is a tool. It's an enchanted quill she has. It's a tool used to convey a message. What did Harry do? Okay, well, first fucking day of class, he gets into a loud argument with the teacher in front of all the students after being asked multiple times to let it go, to knock it off. He doesn't. He still gets into a fucking fight with her. So just blatant disrespect and blatant refusal to yield to authority. So there's lots of different ways that can be addressed. But these are, so we have a class full of students, all of which have wands, all of which are capable of casting spells. We have one teacher. Yes, Umbridge is more powerful, theoretically, than individually the other students in class. We have one teacher. Her job is to teach a curriculum. We have students who can be potentially dangerous, especially Harry Potter, who we'll get into in a little bit, who specifically is dangerous, challenging her authority in front of everyone and essentially putting the thought in everyone's head that she doesn't have to be listened to and everybody can stand up to her. So she's going to have to make an example. She has to make an example of Harry. She has no choice. Lots of different ways you can do this. She could have him publicly flogged, which is beat with canes. She could have him expelled. She could make him write, I will not tell lies 100 times on a chalkboard. There's all kinds of different things she could do. But all of those things require lots and lots of effort on part of the student and have varying degrees of potential success. But what she chooses to do is, yes, harsh. No one's saying that the enchanted quill isn't harsh. It is harsh, but it's effective. And a couple of things to think about. That quill leaves no long-term damage. Yes, it cuts into their skin. Yes, it it hurts them. But as seen later in the movie, when some of the other kids are in detention and having to use the enchanted quill, one of which is a smaller child, One of the older kids says, look, you can't even see it. It heals really fast. Yes, it hurts when you have to do it, but it heals. It leaves no long-lasting damage. It's controlled. Unlike some other injuries that other students have received, which we'll get to soon when we start talking about some of the other things that she's done, or some of the other things that have happened. So it's not permanent. It is harsh, but it's controlled. And most importantly, it's a way of conveying a lesson without having to beat it into someone. So anyone who's ever tried to learn anything, there's typically speaking, there are two ways in which to learn or I guess one could say three ways in which to learn something and have it stick. The first is repetition. I think it's something like if you do something 15 times, it begins to become second nature. I think that's what it is, or something along those lines. So there's repetition, there's humor, and there's pain. And I can tell you from experience, those are the three best ways to learn and retain anything. Even taking repetition out of it, pain and humor tend to be the best ways of doing it. Think about when you yourself are a child. You reach up and your mom tells you 100 times, don't touch the hot stove. Don't touch that, it's hot. Don't touch that, it's hot. Don't touch that, it's hot. The first time you put your hand on a stove, yes, you will get a severe burn, but it's the last time you'll ever fucking do it. And that's what it is with the quill. She used the quill on Harry because it was a fucking tool, because she realized she needed to get through to him that she's not to be questioned. Her authority is not to be questioned, nor should it be, because she's the teacher and he's the student. So she uses something that, again, yes, is harsh. But even if you fast forward several movies, what is it that Harry repeats to her when he fucking casts a spell at her? And I think it was Deathly Hallows Part 1. He kind of is in like a disguise and everything, and he ends up in front of her and he replies with, I cannot tell lies. Now, yeah, he says it as like a action movie catchphrase type thing before he zaps her with a wand. But the whole point was, that's a lesson that Harry Potter will never forget. And yeah, a lot of people got pissed because Harry was not technically lying and saying that Voldemort was alive, because he was. But Umbridge doesn't fucking know that. Umbridge doesn't know that. The Ministry of Magic doesn't know that. And the only people who are saying that Voldemort's alive are people that are following Dumbledore and what appears to be his insane war against something that's already dead. So, yeah, from a privileged standpoint of having the information that we have as viewers or readers, it looks like she's unjustly torturing Harry by making him write, I will not tell lies, when he wasn't lying. But she doesn't have a way of knowing that. To her, he is lying. He's disruptive. He is rude. He is disobedient, and he needs to be taught a lesson. So she uses a tool that, guess what? It did teach him a lesson in the sense that he really didn't have to write more than one time. Like, it got the fucking point across. And yeah, she uses that same technique later in the movie in detention for other students. And yeah, again, no one's saying it isn't a harsh tool to use, but I gotta say, it's fucking effective. And if all of it takes is one use of that quill to get the point across, then that's a good tool to use. Because again, it's not, I mean, if it were to permanently disfigure or scar or kill or maim someone, then fuck that. That would be unacceptable. But it doesn't. It hurts them, it heals them, and it conveys the lesson. And I actually think that it's a useful tool. Yeah, I mean, I guarantee fucking Harry's going to think twice before he interrupts class and challenges the teacher. If he would have went to Umbridge after class, chances are she wouldn't have made him use the quill. But he embarrassed her in front of the students. He challenged her in front of everybody on her first fucking day. So she basically met his level of intensity, and she just had more tools at her disposal. So for me, the quill is not a sign that she's evil. If anything, I feel the quill is a sign that she is a dedicated teacher. She wants Harry to conform. Well, she technically doesn't want Harry there at all, which we'll get to in a little bit. But but take specifically Harry out of the equation. She wants the students to conform to the curriculum specified by the Ministry of Magic, because that's basically the Department of Education. They set the curriculum. It's the professor's jobs to follow that curriculum and teach it to the students. That's all she's trying to do. So after all of that goes on, Harry and his friends realize we still need to know how to do Defense Against the Dark Arts. We don't think that she's doing us justice by teaching us the theoretical. We need to learn it. So the students get together and they basically beg, for lack of a better term, Harry to teach them in secret how to do actual spells, because Harry's got some experience defending himself against evil people. So they all get together and they agree, and Harry says, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to teach you guys because we need to know how to do this. So they find this hidden room that's hidden within Hogwarts. It moves around all the time, and it gives them a safe place to practice. So that's what they start doing. Well, as they're doing this, Umbridge obviously sees that shit's going on, and she eventually becomes the Inquisitor. So in her mind, her job is to sniff out all of this dissent, to sniff out all of these students who are acting not in accordance with the rules, but are just being chaotic and doing whatever they want. So she emboldens some students to kind of be her eyes and ears. She's got this really weird looking janitor guy who is trying to figure out where this room is at, because it's obvious that kids are doing stuff in there they're not supposed to. So she roots all around. Eventually, she is able to get into this room. They find a way to break into it from another side. She gets into it and she puts a stop to it, to which all this, again, to the viewer or the reader, seems like this very evil thing, because, oh no, she's preventing them from being able to defend themselves. But again, in her mind, from the knowledge that she has available to her, there's nothing to defend yourself against at this point, because Voldemort he's not back in her mind. One of the other huge things that tends to get a lot of hate towards Umbridge is, so she tries to get Harry expelled. After she finds him, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Before we get into one of the things that draws the most hate towards her, I want to explain a little bit more about what happens after she finds their secret training area. She finds their secret training area, and they call themselves the Army of Dumbledore. Which is a stupid fucking name, but it's what they call themselves. So she brings them in front of the board and says, look, I want Harry expelled. He's clearly, trying to lead the children in a revolt against us. He needs to be booted. Enough is enough here. Look, he's raising an army. This is enough. Well, Dumbledore protects him by saying, Harry only did what I asked him to do. So they go to fire Dumbledore, and he just kind of vanishes. So Umbridge is then promoted to become the new headmistress of Hogwarts. So she takes over Dumbledore's position. So, and in doing so, she really starts bringing the hate towards her. But again, we're going to look at what she does, and I don't think the hate's warranted, and I'll let you guys decide. So, after she becomes headmistress, she starts going through and making some major changes. Now, I may be jumping around a little bit because, okay, sorry. Within this span, and I can't remember if it's before she becomes headmistress. I'm thinking it must be before she becomes headmistress, but after she becomes Inquisitor, there's a part where she goes through and fires and puts forth a plan to fire two of the professors who are fan favorite people. The first of which is Hagrid, which is this big motherfucker who is the professor in charge of one of the animals. And the other is this meek looking professor named Trelawney, who is the professor for divination. Now, this pisses a lot of people off because she tries to get Hagrid, or she doesn't try, she works towards getting Hagrid fired because, sorry for the fans of Hagrid, but let's take an unbiased look here. Hagrid is a bumbling, insecure, ineffective teacher whose carelessness and inability to wrangle his class has led to multiple student injuries with wild animals. So again, Umbridge, she's part of the Ministry of Magic. She was brought in, so she's part of the Department of Education. She walks in and she sees this professor who really only has the job because he's friends with Dumbledore. And she says, enough is enough. He's a danger to the students. He's not teaching them the stuff that they need to learn. We need to get rid of him. And that brings a lot of ire because a lot of people love Hagrid. The other is Trelawney, who is, again, this very, very meek. She's got these thick Coke bottle glasses, very shy looking woman, probably in her late 40s, who teaches divination. But the thing is she is just completely unqualified for what she's teaching. It's more of a theoretical, or even not even a theoretical. It's one of those subjects that probably shouldn't be taught or shouldn't be its own class because it's such a hit or miss. It's like a gift. You either have the gift of divination or you don't have the gift of divination. But on top of the fact that the subject matter itself is kind of iffy, she is herself an unreliable, unqualified person. She had, if my research is correct, and I apologize if it's not, but if my research is correct, she's had 2 prophecies herself that she can't even remember. She hasn't put forth a prophecy or put forth a vision in forever. In fact, Umbridge in the movie gives her an opportunity to give a prophecy. She's like, anything. She's like, tell me, what do you got? And she couldn't. Teacher was put on the spot. She couldn't come up with anything. So she's fired because, again, she's damaging the children's education, which, yes, for the viewers or the readers, they get pissed because they like Trelawney. They like Hagrid. They don't want to see them gone. But look at what Umbridge's role is. Umbridge's role is trying to make the best learning institution she can for the students. And these 2 dead weights are hurting it. They're only there because they're Dumbledore's friends. Dumbledore, in fact, actually even steps in after Trelawney's fired and quote unquote tries to save her or saves her by saying, yeah, she might be fired, but he controls who lives at Hogwarts. So, I mean, it was another example of Dumbledore showing that his personal concern is not the children's education. He's really just concerned about his war and concerned about putting his friends and the people that are loyal to him into positions that are useful to him, which is bullshit and completely against what he should be doing as the headmaster of a school. So I believe, in hindsight, I believe that takes place before she becomes headmistress, just because Dumbledore is there to save Trelawney, which means he hasn't exited yet. So after that happens, that's when Dumbledore exits and she becomes the new headmistress. She's put in charge. So there's another scene a little bit later in the book where she's getting ready to, apologize here, I'm just checking my notes real quick. Okay, so before we get to the owls, I want to talk a little bit more on why she has it out for Harry Potter. So, okay, Harry's the main protagonist of the series, hence the series is called Harry Potter and this, Harry Potter and that, Harry Potter, Harry Potter. He's the main hero, the protagonist of the story. But let's stop for a second and realize what Harry Potter must look like to people who aren't reading a book or watching a movie about him. He is a fucking lightning rod for problems. You know, in his years at Hogwarts, there have been multiple people that have come after him and hurt students and hurt the school and caused all sorts of problems because they're after him. Harry's constantly being disruptive. He's constantly challenging. He's constantly doing things he's not supposed to do. At the end of the day, Harry Potter is a liability for Hogwarts. And she's just trying to get him the fuck out. She's trying to get him out because it's going to be best for all the other students. Now, at the beginning of Order of the Phoenix, we see Harry get attacked by these things called Dementors. You might know Dementors as the worst part of prison, which is a joke if you're a fan of The Office. You may also know the Dementors, though, as these things that kind of like patrol Azkaban and are under the control, which is a prison, by the way, which are under the control of the Ministry of Magic. And you find out that Umbridge, she's actually the one who sent the 2 Dementors after Harry. Now, people are like, well, that evil bitch, why would she do that? Well, she's trying to get Harry out of Hogwarts because he is a liability. She's trying to protect the institution and what it stands for from this potential, like, harbinger of doom. So she sends, and here's the thing. Yes, she sent Dementors at him and they're scary, but she sent Dementors at Harry knowing that Harry is incredibly good at casting a spell called a Patronus, which is a spell when cast will get rid of Dementors. So she sent something after him that she knew without a shadow of a doubt he was 100% capable of defending himself against. Why did she do it? She did it because she wanted to accuse him of underage magic and get him expelled. That didn't work. She tried, didn't work. So that's when she had to go a different approach. So after catching him and his quote unquote Army of Dumbledore, that gave her another avenue in which to give Harry the stanky boot and kick him out of Hogwarts. That didn't work because Dumbledore stepped in, took responsibility for what happened. He gets fired. Harry gets to stay put. So that didn't work for her. So she, at this point, she just starts putting forth decree after decree after decree, tightening rules. She's not doing it to be a dictator. She's not doing it just to do it. But at every avenue, at every turn, she meets resistance from both students and professors alike. The entire institution that Dumbledore had built in Hogwarts that existed when she got there was fighting against her. Professors telling their students not to listen to Umbridge, but she's the one in charge. So she starts getting harsher and harsher in an attempt to deal with all of this disrespect and fighting that keeps being directed at her. So now we come upon the owls. Now the owls are basically like the I'm going to call it not necessarily the SATs. It's like the state standardized testing. Like if you're, I don't know if you're in a state that has that. Pennsylvania has it. They're called the PSSA, the Pennsylvania State Assessment Test. That's all of these things are. OWL is an acronym. I can't remember exactly what's an acronym for, but the acronym is OWL, and it's like a test. You take it every year, depending on what year you are in at Hogwarts. You take your assessment test, you see how well you do. So the scene with it, she's there and she's standing in front of this gigantic pendulum, which is very soothing. It's this whoosh, whoosh sound. And she's got her little chalkboard written up and it explains everything you need to do. It looks just like a standardized testing room. And then it's a room full of kids and they're all taking their owls. And in the middle of this, two students who I believe are twin brothers to Harry's friend, Ron Weasley, these two decide that they don't want to be at Hogwarts anymore. And they, well, ultimately what they do is definitely grounds for expulsion, if not criminal charges. They break into the owls with all of these fireworks and completely, they don't just disrupt the test. These fireworks are blowing up papers. At one point, they set off a firework that looks like this big Asian dragon that chases Umbridge and like clamps its jaws down on her. Now, of course, because it's a firework, it's not real. She doesn't get bitten or anything, but it goes off and it like singes her hair. And the explosion from it damages the school and damages this wall where all these declarations were hanging. And then all the students run out of the test and run outside. And the entire thing is completely and utterly disrupted. And it's completely uncalled for. As a viewer or as a reader, we cheer because we don't like Umbridge, because we're supposed to dislike her and be like, oh, yay, anarchy. But bullshit. That's a fucking school. And again, I can't stress this enough. This is a school where kids who can wield tremendous power go to learn how to be respectful and control this tremendous power that they have access to. But we're supposed to be like, yay, anarchy, yay, them sticking it to this lady. But this lady was brought in to protect the students, protect the institution, and make sure that these kids are getting the education that they deserve. But instead, she is completely disrespected. The owls are completely disrupted, and the school is damaged by this blatant, just fucking blatant act of, towards Umbridge, you could say terrorism, towards Clash, I guess you could just blatant ass act of disrespect and disruption. So, after this happens and stuff, there is the whole, she's trying to get words out of people and they wouldn't talk. So she threatens to use, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's some sort of torture curse that's, I guess, illegal to use. And she threatens it to get information out of someone. And the threat works. Now, this incident is meant to show, oh, she's so depraved, she's so evil, she's going to use an illegal torture curse on a child. But the way the scene plays out, in my opinion, I don't think she ever had intentions of actually using that on a student. Now, it's up in the air whether or not she would have actually used it, like if she didn't want to use it because she didn't want to get fired and because it's illegal, or if she didn't want to use it because she just personally wouldn't do that to a kid. It's hard to say. Maybe she would do it to a child, but I don't think the threat was real. I think the threat was made for exactly the response it got, which is it got an answer. She didn't have to do it. She just had to threaten it. As a parent, I've threatened things thousands of times that I have no intention of actually doing. Sometimes you have to use a threat to motivate or to get a response that is necessary. Acting upon the threat, that's when you start to get into some morally, a little more of a moral clear-cut scenario. But threatening to use an illegal torture curse, I can't say that that's an overreaction, because again, look at what happened to her. She's just overseeing a test, and all of a sudden the whole fucking room basically explodes in fireworks. The school is damaged. The test is completely disrupted to the point where they're basically going to have to throw out what they already did that wasn't destroyed and completely redo from the beginning, which probably means different questions because you wouldn't want kids cheating. There's all kinds of, you basically have to redo the whole fucking thing. So was she wrong to threaten that? I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure she was fucking pissed. I'd have been pissed. And that's another thing to keep in mind. She's just a person. She's just a person who has been incredibly disrespected, incredibly unfairly judged since she got there. She is an excellent employee. She's an excellent employee doing exactly what she was brought in to do. But because of Dumbledore's, just let's call it what it is, failure as a fucking headmaster. And that's what it is. It's a failure. He's a shit headmaster. Because of all of the shit he just let go year after year after year, they didn't have a choice. The Ministry of Magic had no choice. They had to step in, put someone who was going to get it done into the position where they could. So lastly, we're going to talk about what happens to Umbridge at the end of the movie. So at the end of the movie, she's chasing Harry Potter and Hermione and I think someone else. I think Ron may have been there, but she's chasing them out into the woods, and she chases them out into the woods, and they come across centaurs, which are hinted at earlier in the movie and explained that they basically hate magic users humans. They're just not fans. They run across the centaurs, and the centaurs are like, who the fuck are you and why are you in our territory? So Umbridge, feeling threatened by the centaurs, basically tells them, look, I'm here as headmaster. You are on our grounds. You need to move along. This doesn't pertain to you. They don't listen. She gets a little, they actually throw something. I think it's a spear they throw at her. She uses magic to deflect it. And then at that point casts a spell that takes this rope and ties up one of the centaurs and starts to suffocate him. Hermione and Harry tell her to stop because she's killing the centaur, and Umbridge won't. And it is a little cruel because she does have a look on her face like she's enjoying the suffering of the centaur. But again, she is protecting herself. I mean, there are multiple centaurs there. She knows they don't like humans. She knows they're not a big fan of wizards. She doesn't talk to them very nicely, but she may have been trying a show of force to get them to leave her alone. Once she casts that spell and the centaur starts getting in a situation where it starts to die, she is eventually taken out of the equation by a giant who kind of picks her up, breaks her wand accidentally because I think one of the centaurs step on it or something, but her wand gets broken, the spell doesn't work, and the giant just kind of throws her to the centaurs, who then carry her away. Now, a lot of people cheered at that and they're like, yay, that stupid bitch, she got what she deserved. Did she though? So one of the things that's really important to talk about is, and we're going to talk some speculation here because some of this stuff is speculation and hasn't officially been fleshed out. But it is known that J.K. Rowling, the author who created Harry Potter and wrote the books, she did base her centaurs on the Greek myths about centaurs. Here's the thing, though. In Greek mythology, centaurs are rapists. That's a fact in Greek mythology. They are rapists. She based her centaurs on Greek mythology. No one knows exactly what happened to Umbridge between when she got taken by the centaurs, when Dumbledore eventually finds her and rescues her, and when we see her next. But some of the things that we do know is that Umbridge is traumatized to the point where even the sound of hoofbeats almost drive her into a panic. Now, I've read a bunch of different theories on what happened to her when she was with the centaurs, but I am of a mindset that I think, and I didn't read the book, but from what I understand in the book, it's even more apparent. She got gang raped by these centaurs before she was saved by Dumbledore. Now, I don't care how much hatred you have for this woman. Nobody deserves that. Nobody does. Nobody deserves to have that happen to them. Nobody deserves to have people cheer that happened to them. And that's going to be traumatizing for their entire life. So I guess at the end of the day, because I'm kind of wrapping up here, at the end of the day, the facts of the matter is Dolores Umbridge was a reformer. She was brought in as a reformer because Hogwarts was dangerous, it was unruly, and it was being led by incompetent teachers and a nepotistic bureaucracy. She was brought in to reform, to bring it back to its glory, because it wasn't in its glory, because Dumbledore was a fucking shit headmaster. He was a terrible headmaster. But because he was a hero, but because he was a powerful wizard, we were meant as viewers or readers to love him and to side with the poor decisions he made as an educator, because he is considered an educator when he's headmaster of the leading wizardry school. I mean, she came in to this broken education system. She walked in, she had good intentions, and although she herself doesn't like kids, she says that right before the centaurs take her. She says she doesn't even like kids. Even though she doesn't like kids, she came in with good intentions and ultimately the best interest for the students as a whole in mind. She wanted to make sure the organization was serving the children the way it was supposed to and following the rules put forth by the Ministry of Magic, which Hogwarts should have been doing anyway. They're not an independent entity. They are under the purview of the Ministry of Magic. I guess to just put a little cherry on top of this case for Umbridge, she knew she was going to be hated, yet she was willing to be hated in order to enact reforms, which, if they would have been allowed to take place, would have ultimately helped the children long term get the education that they deserve to get. So is she this fucking terrible devil who is, who deserves this hatred and vitriol that everybody throws at her? No, I don't think she does. I think most people's hatred of Umbridge is centered on this narrow viewpoint that we're supposed to have as readers or viewers of either the books or the movies. But if you take just a few minutes to really kind of look at her, who she really was, what her role really was, she was a great employee and she did her job very well and did not deserve the fate that was bequeathed upon her when the centaurs took her away. In the movies, she begs Harry to tell them that she's not an enemy. And he says to her, I cannot tell lies. He basically gets a play off of, what she made him do with the quill. And he just lets her get taken away. If anything, that puts Harry firmly. So if this was D&D and we're looking at alignments, I would say that Umbridge is probably something along the lines of lawful neutral, because she's about following the rules while she's not necessarily super good or super bad. I'd say she follows the rule of law. She's a great bureaucrat. She follows the rules. She, expects the curriculum and the rules to be followed. Harry, I would say, was probably chaotic good, meaning he does a lot of good, but he's willing to break the rules to do it. But by letting Umbridge be taken away by the centaurs, I actually think if this were like a D&D campaign, I think that's enough to kick Harry's alignment from chaotic good to maybe chaotic neutral, if not maybe even right on the lines of starting to get evil. I mean, he willingly let a woman get taken away by a bunch of creatures who hate humans and hate wizards and are known for raping. There's very little justification there. So that's what I've got. I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I know it's been a long time in the making. We've kicked around an idea of doing a follow-up, almost like a bonus content episode with me, Bethany, and Katie, Those are my two friends from the Inactioneers who very, 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 very much hate Dolores Umbridge. Almost like a reaction episode where I can spar off with them on my take. I don't know if we're actually going to do that. I got to talk to them, but it's been kicked around as an idea. So a few things that we still have in the works here. This is the last episode in the 10-part series. So moving forward, we're going to go back to our standard format. As far as finding different fandoms, doing character highlights, plot highlights, as far as some things that are in the works that are coming up. My buddy JJ and I, he's been on the show a couple of times. We are going to do an episode focusing on the Peacemaker fandom, which is a show right now on HBO Max that I absolutely love. We're going to do an episode on toxic masculinity using that fandom as our lens. I've got a couple of episodes based on Avatar: The Last Airbender that are coming up. One will be on Zuko, Prince Zuko. The other will be on Uncle Iroh. And they'll focus on a couple of different things. I've got, let's see, what else do I got here? I have an episode based on self-love, which will be focusing on the character Jerry Gergich from Parks and Recreation. Just all kinds of really fun things in store. I've got a whole list of authors I met at Sci-Fi Valley Con last year. I'm going to reach out to, look to put together some episodes where we can explore some of their writings. Just lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff in store. Super exciting time. Happy to be back into the swing of things. I really hope you all enjoyed this 10-part series. Eventually, I'll probably do series again at a later time. I don't know if I'll necessarily do a 10-parter. That's a big chunk. But so any fandoms, anything out there that you guys are watching or fans of or listening to or reading and you want me to dig into, shoot me a message. You can find me at The Gray Path on Facebook, on Instagram, YouTube. You can email me at seekthegraypath@gmail.com. I did get an email a couple of days ago from Pandora about fucking time. I only submitted to get on their platform, well, before I actually launched the podcast. So it was before July of last year. And they just finally approved me. As of the recording right now, I'm recording this on Friday, the 11th. It's still, I'm still not technically on the platform. They said it may take a few days to get everything up, but it has officially been approved by Pandora. So once I'm actually on there, that means I will officially be available pretty much everywhere you can listen to podcasts. So exciting stuff. Took long enough to get there. I hope you guys are all enjoying this. I've had so much fun doing this. No end in sight. Just lots of moving forward. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions and comments on the series. Really, I'm looking for engagement. So if you guys want to talk, chat about things, visit the Facebook, start leaving some comments. You can visit the YouTube, leave some comments there. Let's get some conversations going. As always, guys, I am your host, Tony B, and you be safe out there.